pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Well, not here, so Sonia's gonna do the minutes and read the minutes. Ah. We didn't have them last one.
Did part of them.
No, I think you got one copy, so.
Hey, Donnie, how are you?
September 4th, 2018, the regular meeting of the Franklin Town Board was called to order by Supervisor Jeff Taggart at 7:35 p.m. Present were Jeff Taggart, Garrett Six, David Grant, Dwight Bruno, Donnie Smith, Mark Lang, and Paul Warner. The minutes were read from the August 7th, 2018 meeting. Garrett Sitz made the motion to accept the minutes as read. David Grant seconded the motion, and all present agreed. Dave Tuthill gave the report for the Kellogg Franklin Trust. Dave made the motion to appoint Sonia Johns as deputy clerk. Dwight seconded the motion, and all present agreed. Mark Lane reported that they finished paving Jackson Hill Road and Franklin Depot Road. Matt Taggart is looking to put up a garage. Planning Board, Williams subdivision is done. Dave made a motion to go into executive session to discuss legal matters. Donnie seconded the motion, and all present agreed. The board returned from executive session at 8:23 p.m. Garrett made the motion to return to regular meeting. Dave seconded the motion, and all present agreed. Jeff discussed the building addition at the town garage. There is a new service on the cell tower. Have heard nothing about the grant for the lighting at the town garage. The question was asked where the money was coming from for the building fund. Paul explained that there was a line item in the budget for that and that it wasn't coming from the highway money. With nothing further to come before the board, Garrett made the motion to adjourn the meeting at 9:01 p.m. Dave seconded the motion, and all present agreed.
Any additions or corrections?
There's not a new service on the tower yet.
No, right, they're looking for another service on it.
Okay.
Yep, you're right.
Jeff,
Yes,
you didn't give a specific reason for going into executive session.
for legal matters.
Yeah, but you're
It's
not
gotta be
allowed,
more,
it has to be more specific, you can't just give it generic.
to deal with,
legal matters and personnel. That's all you have to say.
well, I'd like to, before I explain what it was about, Brian, I'd like to have,
No, I mean, you don't have to give it in detail, just which lawsuit it is.
well,
Which what?
Lawsuit or legal
pending,
matter?
pending, what, I don't know if there's a lawsuit yet,
Mhm.
but there is one pending, I believe. So I thought there was gonna be one. But other than that, I'm not gonna go any further without, getting in touch with our attorney to say that I have to explain more than that. I'm sorry.
I'll forward you the,
Well, I'll call my attorney and I'll let you know next month. How's that? Okay. Any other additions or corrections to the minutes? I'll entertain a motion
I made the
to
motion
approve
to
them.
accept the minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Paul, can I get a clip so we can send it around for who's here? 'Cause
I don't have a.
you don't have a clipboard. Just so we can have a sign-in list. Dave, you wanna tell us about the
Yes,
Kellogg Fund?
Kellogg Trust Report for October 1st, 2018. Financial, we don't have all the official report numbers from September yet, 'cause it's so early in the month.
Yep.
However, the investment account is still around 970,000, and the checking is approximately 8,000. We should have exact numbers next month, as the town board meeting's a little bit later in the month, because we just don't have the paperwork yet. We are having our annual election on October 30th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Kellogg Educational Community Center. There's one board position to be filled. The trust board policy was set up for 5-year terms with members being reelected or replaced. And the way we set up the rotation, my term is up this year. I am planning to serve another term if I'm reelected. The notice has been placed in the Walton Reporter for the next 2 weeks, and the petition details are available there if anybody else wants to run. There will be a community cafe at the Kellogg Educational Community Center to raise some of the matching grant funds toward the exercise equipment grant we received. It's going to be on Friday, October 19th from 11:30 to 1:30. Menu will be in the Treadwell News and the Walton Reporter. And things are kind of winding down for the winter, so reports will be brief for the next few months. Maybe not one every month, but things are had a good summer.
I do appreciate you allowing us to have our several meetings there.
Yep. The next one's in December.
Yeah. So you can't be a true snowbird yet. You gotta be there for December. Any questions for Dave? Okay. I think, Jim, you want to do your presentation now?
Whenever you like.
Well, I mean, we haven't got anything else, why don't you come on and, I'm not saying nothing else to do, but we haven't got into anything else yet. And you wanted to-
I was kind of surprised.
Meeting adjourned, okay. This is to determine the need for a reappraisal in the town of Franklin. That's what this presentation from our town assessor is.
Yeah, oh, give me just
I think these are just the same thing as this log.
Now, I guess if we could go with the one like
There's
us and see what happens.
Did you want him to pass those, Jim?
Yeah, if you would pass those out, that would be
Take one
great.
and pass it here.
Pass these around. Oh, okay.
You thought I was giving you some light reading, right?
Yeah, I was there, whoa.
There's gonna be a quiz at the end, too, right?
Okay, go. Figure you get over there.
I'm not sure where to stand now. There's been some talk about reappraisal, some questions, some concerns, some people who felt that it would be important to do. As you know, and as some people here may know, the last time we did a full reappraisal was for the 2005 assessment roll. We did the first one in recent history, would have been for 1998. We then maintained assessments at 100% from 98 to 2005. And since then, we've gone through some reassessments, which are really different from reappraisal. For the purposes of tonight, reappraisal really refers to looking at each parcel individually and coming up with a new value for that parcel, irrespective of what the current assessment is, determining what the value is for that parcel. So basically, we just wanted to go through, I wanted to present to you some information, not all that lengthy, about where we stand on that. And the presentation that I've handed out to you, you can actually get on the website, and that's where we're going to do this from tonight. So if you go to the assessor's page on the website, you go down to the bottom of that, you will see a link for documents. And for there, you will see some other documents, the assessment rolls. For those that don't know, if you ever need the assessment roll, this is where you get them. I know I had a question today. The town is required to post the assessment roll. Counties don't. There's only 2 counties in the state of New York that assess, Tompkins and Nassau. So it's actually the towns that are supposed to post those. You can find that there. But if you go to the bottom to public presentations, and despite the fact that I promised that the last presentation would be on there, it's not on there. So anyway, you don't care about that tonight. This is the presentation that's there in front of you, and that's basically what we're looking at is, you know, it's easy to say, well, we need to do a reappraisal or whatever. What we want to do is just look at a little bit of data, some brief stuff tonight to see what the need for that is. In our world, the reason for reappraisal is that in New York State, assessments are supposed to be at a uniform percentage of value. That's defined by Real Property Tax Law 3052. So all that means is that every property in the town, in theory, should be at the same percentage of value. It doesn't matter what the percentage is, as long as it's 100 or less. It can't be over 100. But what's important is that everybody be at the same percentage. So how do we know if they're at the same percentage? One of the ways that we test that is the sales ratio study. Sales ratio study is just that. We look at what did it sell for, what's it assessed for, what's the relationship between those two numbers, and does that relationship exist for all properties? That's a very simplified version of what the ratio study is. So now, and you may find that your printed ones are actually better than this. What you're looking at here is we're looking at, remember that everything that I'm presenting to you tonight here is strictly residential, and it's strictly from July 1 of 2013 to today. In other words, we're saying it's a rural area, so we're going to use up to 5 years worth of sales. We're not going to go past 5 years worth. This is all of the valid sales in the town of Franklin over that time period. The x-axis, the horizontal at the bottom, is the sale price. And the y-axis, the vertical on the left, is what is assessed at the time that it sold. Not after it sold, at the time that it sold. So the way the graph is set up is that a truly diagonal line from the lower left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner would represent perfect. In other words, it would represent if it sold for $100,000, it was assessed for $100,000. Sold for $200,000, you get the picture, right? So this displays all the data points, what we would call observations, and if for anybody here that's into statistics, they're called observations. Then we let Excel draw a trend line through there to say, okay, how does it look like they're all doing as a group? Again, for those of you that are into statistics, it gives you an R value on the slope of the trend line. And just understand that the higher the R value, when I say higher, I mean closer to 1, in theory, the better the relationship is, that there actually is a relationship, that they're not all over the place. This is all of them. We actually had a sale, which technically is residential, that was in the ballpark of $700,000. Okay, so that's why the graph is like it is. So what I did was I said, okay, that half of those are meaningless to us. That doesn't represent the typical property in the town of Franklin. So now on the next one, we just simply went down to 500,000. We said, okay, take those out, recalculate the line. And the one thing you should notice with the line is that, again, we said lower left-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner would be perfect. The thing you'll notice with each of the lines in there is that as the value of the property goes up, go to the right on the horizontal axis, as that line goes, as we go to the right, the line tends to drop. Basically what that means is the higher priced, higher valued residential properties tend to be assessed at a lower percentage of their value. And I won't spend a lot of time on that. That's not a Franklinism. That actually happens for a few different reasons. If any of you are into statistics, it's a nature of regression. There are other reasons too. You tend to not have that many of the sales of the higher priced properties. They may be even more unique than your average $150,000 to $200,000 home. So that's another reason they tend to be that way. So now we've got this neck down to 350,000, which is probably now we're down to the more of, 80% of the residential properties are probably now being described in this graph. But again, we do see that as the price of the property goes up, they tend to be assessed at a lower percentage of that value. This next graph is the same thing. And I know you're saying, what are you talking about? It doesn't look anything like it, right? Basically what this does is just looks at the ratio, which is going to be over here on the vertical axis. It looks at them as a ratio. Divide sale price by assessed value. What's the ratio? So anything over 1 means that to get that assessment back to market value, you would have to multiply it times 1.05 or whatever the number is. The line down the middle, which to those looking on the screen is completely invisible, as I can see from here, but hopefully you can see it in your... The line down the middle shows the median. This is all of the sales. Again, this is the same group of sales that we looked at in the beginning. The size of the box represents the 50%. It represents the first quartile and the upper quartile. So 50% of the observations fall within that box. Basically what you want to look for in a box plot, Excel calls it a box and whisker, is the narrower that box is, the more uniformity that there is. But again, this is 5 years worth of sales, all the residential. A couple of things to note about the residential sales, and some of this may surprise you, and some of it may not. The next 2 bar graphs are looking at 2 things. We're looking at the number of sales, which is what you're looking at in this first one. How many sales were in that calendar year? Going left to right, we're looking 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. So obviously one of the things you got to consider is 18 is partial, because we're still in 2018, right? But you notice a spike last year in the number of sales. I mean, there was somewhat a pattern there, though there was a dip in 15 for number of sales, but last year was a spike. And I think the thing that you'll find the most interesting, and for those of you that have followed the market to a certain degree, you won't be too surprised at this. Last year there was also a spike in value. And all this graph is giving you is the average sale price for residential. This is not looking at the assessments at all. This is looking at what was the average sale price. So what we're saying is for 14, 15, 16, the average sale price was in the ballpark of 150. Right? But last year it went up tremendously. Who knows what this year will do? Again, we only have whatever, like 6, 7, 8 months. I say less than 10 months because it takes a while to record these sales. I mean, we don't have the full year's worth of sales, but just anecdotally, it appears that last year there were some of the higher priced properties in the town that sold. So that contributed to this value here. And then the last graph that I'll show you tonight, which I know you guys are probably all graphed out, but this is the one that actually means something to me. This is now taking that first box plot that we looked at, and now we're stratifying it by year to say, okay, has there been, what's happened over that 5-year period? So again, basically, the wider the box gets, the less uniformity there is within. The farther up that median line goes over a period of time means that the level of assessment is decreasing, which we've seen in our equalization rate, right? Last year, our equalization rate was in the upper 90s, and this year it's barely over 90, it's 90.5. So, I mean, we're seeing that, and some of that is reflected the sales that occurred last year.
Can you say that again? Higher the boxes on the line, the less
The wider the box, the less uniformity.
Like the next thing.
And then the dark line in the middle, which is absolutely invisible, especially when the bubbles are going around.
Right.
The dark line in the middle represents the median. And again, in this, we're looking at the relationship, the ratio, the relationship between sale divided by assessed value. And again, remember that the numbers on the left represent, in theory, what needs to happen to the assessment to get it back to market value. A lot of times when people do sale, when the state does sales ratio study, they do it the other way around. They divide the assessment by the sale price to come up with a level of assessment. I don't look at it that, I just do the reciprocal of that because we're trying to say, okay, what needs to be done to the assessment to get it back to where it needs to be. So a couple of things that we get out of this. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, I just didn't
Okay.
hear what you said. Thank you.
So basically, I'll just finish up here. This is the things that I observed from this. That the sales ratios over the past 5 years have always said that the assessments are, I mean, we're not in fear of being over 100, okay? That's what we're saying there. We're not in fear of being over 100. The second bullet item is saying that the higher priced residential properties have tended to be assessed at a lower percentage of market value. Some of that you can fix and some of it you can't. Again, the more unique those properties are, the more difficult they become to appraise because they have less of a market and there's less transactions to use to compare to. And then the bullet 3 kind of follows with that. As you introduce more of those higher priced properties into any given year, it's going to make the box go like that because the upper valued properties tend to sell at a higher percentage, and therefore when you get a mix of those, that's going to change that. And I apologize for not having reset the timer on that. The increased dispersion, which I measure as the width of the box plot, indicates that there's a lack of uniformity. And one of the things that needs to be done, and I will be doing in the near future, is we need to, this is only looking at residential, we need to look at the next biggest group of properties, and that would be the vacant land. So that's what we will do next. And I will entertain any questions. I tried to get through that in several high spots, and doesn't really require any action, but it does indicate that yes, there is a need for reappraisal in the future.
Right. Other towns have been going through that. I don't know. It seems to be the popular thing to do, I think, because it's been put off so long.
Yeah.
I know when we initially brought Jim on as the town assessor back in 96, 97, whatever year it was. Been a while, yes.
Tony was my first contact within 2 days.
And it was discrepancies in the taxes, and that's why the town board decided at that time to go to a single assessor. And it did, I think, get the taxes more in line, so that there wasn't such a discrepancy between the good old boy effect. I'm sorry, that's what it used to be called. So I think it's the right thing we did, and I think we stopped the annual equalization or revals basically because of the uproar of the taxpayers. They weren't very happy. They didn't see any need for it to keep it at 100%, and so the town board finally, told Jim to, we recommended to not keep it up. And he's been doing, on certain groups each year, I believe. When he feels there's that farmers are lagging behind, he looks at farmers to increase their assessed value or whatever, to bring them where they belong. Maybe they're over assessed, I don't know. But I've never seen too many assessments go down. But as long as you're paying your share, I always thought, if everybody's paying their share of the taxes, then there's no problem. I don't want to pay somebody else's share, and somebody doesn't want to pay. That's just how it should be: fair assessment, fair taxes.
I think the annual turned into a problem. It probably turned into a problem somewhat for me too, but it turned into a problem for members of the public. Having your assessment change each year was out of the norm for New York. There's some states that do that regularly, and I think there's been a lot of talk about cycle. There's no real decision on what the cycle should be. I think annual is not the correct cycle, but at this point we've waited quite a while, and that's probably not the right cycle either. So we're kind of feeling our way here and I'm trying to get some input.
Questions?
Did you ever look at what happens to your trend lines if you pin it through the origin? Because the trend, it should go through the origin. Any of those,
What do you mean by origin?
0, 0.
But we're looking at a sale price, so there would never be a zero. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So what this is doing is saying what is the best fit of relationship between the assessed value and the actual sale price. And if you look at the, if you're really into regression, if you look at the formulas that it produces, they kind of give you an indication. The y coordinate, the y coefficient, excuse me, I knew I'd spit the word out eventually. The y coefficient, in theory, would be the multiplier times the assessed value to get to the cost.
Right.
So that number gives you some idea, other than the constant, gives you some idea of the relationship. And with that, when you compare them over the different groups, you can see the difference in the level of residential assessment depending on the sale price.
Any other questions? We thank you very much, Jim, for coming in and confusing us even more. I think it's, probably the right thing to do. As you said, it's been since '04, '05, something like that, so it's, 12 years. As you said, I don't think there is a, every 5 years you should do this or whatever. It's whatever the town, or I don't know if the state recommends, they give recommendations, or thoughts, or just.
They really don't. They used to, like, the annual was the big
Right,
thing, starting
right.
in '99, and we jumped on that bandwagon and got some checks.
Right,
Some states actually do measures. In other words, they'll do a measure similar to what we do, but what they'll do is a COD, a coefficient of dispersion, to say when it hits a certain point, you need to reappraise. Other ones have a certain timing. I think we're probably gonna need to look at some combination thereof that says annual doesn't work, 15 years doesn't work, somewhere's in the middle, and we've gotta have, basically a plan that says it's gonna be triggered when this happens or when that happens. The only scary thing with right now is, again, last year was apparently a hot year for residential property in Franklin and in most places. I mean, it's not just a Franklinism. So, doing it, and that was, I think, also one of our fears back in 2005. We did the reappraisal in 2005, which uses evaluation date of July 1, 2004. As most of us will probably recall, things were hot then and actually continued to be hot for about another year and a half. I'm not a big proponent of doing a reappraisal at the top of hot, because then in the next couple of years, you could find that you're actually over, and then you're basically forced to reappraise, and it just, I think being a little under 100 most of the time, other than right after the reappraisal, is not necessarily a bad thing.
right.
If I recall, we had issues with, it a lot depends on what other towns do, whether they reappraise or not. We were paying more in county taxes, more, if the county tax went up 3%, our share was higher than 3% increase because we were keeping it 100%. So we kind of have to keep track of what other towns in the county are doing as well, right?
Yeah, but a lot of that's uncontrollable, and while we're giving out good news, this year Franklin's county share will be increased. Our equalization rate going from the 99 down to the 90.5, which, if you spend much time with a graph like that, you realize that at 90.5, we're probably still, the 90.5 is probably still high. I really like